Most people think high stakes conversations are won by asking better questions, but they're not. In counterintelligence, we train a completely different skill, and in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what it is, why it works, and how to use it. In late 2021, I was having dinner with the head of a counterintelligence unit in South America, but the conversation started shifting into a topic I wasn't going to talk about. So I said one thing that was slightly wrong about his background, and he corrected me immediately. And that correction? Well, that correction opened the door for a 20-minute conversation about his background, his training, his operation, all career details and history that I never asked for. And you see, that is not interrogation, that is elicitation. And the reason it works is because it's built for rooms where direct questions are going to trigger defense mechanisms. The CIA trains for collection, but in counterintelligence, we train for extraction. And that difference matters. Think about this. Collection is what happens when you build access over time. You have somebody that's willing to provide that information to you. But extraction, on the other hand, is what happens when you need a specific piece of information from someone who is, well, they're actively trying to filter what they give you. So most professionals bring collection habits into extraction environments, and then they wonder why they leave with vague answers and no leverage. Here's the problem. When you ask a direct question in a hostile conversation, that question signals what you don't know, while also triggering a defense mechanism. And that moment, the moment you ask, you're going to reveal the gap. And once the other person sees the gap, they stop answering the question, so they're going to start managing what they provide you. That's why so many people think they need to ask better questions, when in reality, the problem itself is that you're asking a question. Every communication framework teaches you to ask better questions, but none of them tell you that the question itself is a vulnerability. That's the problem. But counterintelligence solves this differently. The technique is called presumptive elicitation. Let me give you a simple explanation. For this to work, you need to identify the single piece of information that would change your position in that room. Not everything, just the one thing. Because before you walk in, you need to decide what actually matters. Is it going to be timeline? Is it going to be a capability, a relationship, or some missing detail that you're looking for? But if you don't define what that targeted intelligence is, then the room is going to decide that for you. Now, once you have that in mind, you need to separate what you actually know from what you will appear to know. Because your statement needs to be close enough to reality to feel believable, but it needs to be incomplete enough to create a correction. If it is wildly incorrect, they're going to dismiss it. And if it's perfectly right, well, then you just reveal your hand and you get nothing new. The sweet spot here is that you want that partial accuracy, while at the same time having that meaningful gap left wide open. Now, here's the hardest part of this. Once you know that, you need to deliver the statement and then go silent. And that's the hardest part, because now you need to understand that their mind is going to be focused on whether what you said is accurate, not on protecting against the question. And that's where the opening appears. Watch the pause. You need to watch how fast they correct it. You need to watch for the details that they rush to fix. The timing, the specificity, that urgency that comes with it is going to tell you something. Let me give you an example from a case I ran. This was a fraud investigation, and the subject had applied for a loan that was tied to a cosmetic business, but there was no record of the business. So early in the conversation, we were talking about cosmetology schools and her plans, but later I said, I heard you can start a nail business without going to school. I was corrected immediately. And that explanation that came after, well, it gave me all the details that I needed to expose the story. And that's the protocol in motion. You need to observe the one thing that matters. You need to separate now what you know from what you appear to know. And lastly, you analyze the correction before you move on. But here's where most people get in trouble, because this technique, it is running against you right now. And most professionals hand over everything without realizing it. Picture this. When someone says, hey, it seems like your team knew this beforehand. Well, they're not necessarily making a factual claim. They may be testing for a correction, because here is where most people rush to clarify it. And in that one clarification, they hand over a timeline, an acknowledgement, and the defense, it is not to over-explain, but is to have a control response. Do not fill the gap for them. Make them anchor the statement. So what specifically are you referring to? Or what are you basing this on? Now, they're going to have to reveal whether they actually know something or whether they're fishing. Let me give you a scenario where this costs professionals the most. It is in a performance review. So picture this. So you're sitting with your manager and you might be nervous already. And now they say, it seems like your engagement with the team has been lower than usual. See, most people are going to react to this. They're going to hear that feedback and start explaining immediately. But that sentence may not contain a single verified fact. It may just be a probe designed to watch how you react and see what you actually volunteered. What you need to understand here is that you need to have your composure, you need to hold your baseline. Let it sit for 2 full seconds. Then you can say, hey, can you point me to a specific example of what you're seeing? That answer is going to give them nothing, but it's going to force them to show whether they actually have something to say or whether they're testing for you to say something. It is the same principle in a negotiation. Same principle when you're dealing with a difficult client, and the same principle in any room where the other person has an agenda. The room might change, but the technique does not. And here's the reality. Most professionals never get exposed to this because, well, it does not come from a communication workshop. It comes from adversarial environments where questions create defense and precision matters. So if you want more counterintelligence tradecraft for everyday life, go ahead and subscribe. That is the protocol. Follow for the next brief.